本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？全然見えないよ。
How you doing, Internet? It is March 27th, 2017, and you're listening to Waypoint Radio, live from Lobby 1 in Vice HQ. It's me today, and I'm also joined by Patrick Klepek. How you doing, Patrick?
What if I just, ducked out of the way and just left you?
Then it would just be me.
Yep.
It would be me
Just
talking
say,
to
nope,
myself.
It's just the Danielle Riendeau solo hour.
That's right.
Just gonna drop some hot ACLU jams, talk about being on ambulance.
A little bit about that. Yeah, we'll talk about some ambulance time. I'll take some questions about minor injuries.
Ambulance time could be your spin-off podcast in which you tell us all how to stop being bad humans and treat our bodies better.
That's a great idea. Why don't we have this already? Make a note. I'm talking to my production friends, of course. We have Dylan Coburn and Tim Barnes off camera making this happen. It is episode 51, Area 51. I know you're big into the X-Files.
I am. Well, certain seasons. Let's be specific.
That's understandable.
Yeah, come on. First 6 seasons, then after that, it's a debate.
Yeah, we have some issues from there. Although I do like that terrible, what is it? Is it called FPS or something? The VR video game episode is pretty fun.
Oh, yeah.
That's in season 7. That was pretty fun.
There are good episodes in the later run of the X-Files, but it is, you got to start picking and choosing at a certain point.
Yeah, I agree. It's also my mom's birthday, so shout out to my mom.
Congratulations.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. She made it. I'm pretty happy about that.
You did it.
You did it. You got a year older.
Hey, man, as you get older, that's no small feat.
Yeah, that's correct. I think she's 66 now, Route 66 for my mom. And, it's pretty exciting. So, instead of talking about my mom, which I would love to do, I'd love to get her on the show someday.
Again,
She'd be
another
very fun.
separate spin-off podcast.
But that's a spin-off. Me and my mom. Mama Riendeau. That would be the name of that
there you
podcast,
go. Hey, you're coming up with a lot of content that sounds like you're going to leave Waypoint and just build the Riendeau podcast universe.
I think, the 3 people who would listen to that would be very happy, but I don't know if that's sustainable for my life.
Your mom might be the only one listening to the conversations between you and your mom.
Exactly. My mom, my dad, and my sister. See, those are the 3 people listening to that.
That may not sustain the ad revenue you need, but it sustains the ad revenue in your heart.
Yes, that family love, that beautiful family love. Well, speaking of family love, what games have you been playing? When you're gaming family, there is a segue.
My gaming family, this weekend I continued down the descent into Nier. Are we gonna? Right.
Yeah.
So Automata. People are wait. So now what is how are we actually supposed to say it? Automata. Automata or automata?
Automata. I think like automaton. Like automaton.
I feel like we're gonna settle on a pronunciation.
We're gonna make it wrong. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna acknowledge that I don't know how to say it. I'm just gonna say automata because otherwise I'm gonna I'll just call it Nier. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Everyone's got it.
Nier.
So yeah, I've been continuing to play that and really got sucked in to. So one thing I'll say up front, I'm not going to spoil anything that happens in Nier. If you want to finish the whole game, it is no small leap. My timer at the end of it, my final save, I think was 40 or 41 hours. There's probably a little bit of bloated time on there where sometimes I leave games on pause and have to go deal with my kid and stuff like that. So maybe if you buffer in an hour or 2, but I did the vast majority of the side quests. I saw all the main endings, A through E.
Nice.
There are lots of other sort of side endings that we've talked about on the show before, like if you do different goofy things that can end the game in different ways. But and this is something I'm going to write about this week. If you go down the path of Nier, you should go the whole path. If you finish the first ending, it is an ending, but I would say you describe the game in terms of chapters, and you really want to see all 5 chapters. The first 3 chapters are the meatiest. They're going to take you the longest. Chapters 4 and 5, endings D and E, are very quick. You can do them in under an hour. They're essentially alternate paths for different decisions that are made towards the end of the story, as opposed to, B and C, which are like literally, like between 8 and 12 hours, depending on how much time you're putting into the side stuff and upgrading your equipment. But I don't have any problem saying at the end of seeing ending E that I think Nier is a masterwork. It is probably one of my favorite games I've ever played.
Wow.
It is I think a tremendous accomplishment in terms of the questions it asks, like the places it takes you to as a player. And for people that have finished it, if you have seen ending E, without getting into what occurs, there is a very specific ask made of the player that is... Few things have weighed on me more than what it asked me to do. And I don't want to say anything more about it because I want to keep it devoid of context, except to just paint the picture that it's one of the most painful things I've had to do playing a video game. And I'm going to write about it, in which I'll be more specific and kind of explain the context of that. But it is a profound question that is asked of the player that I really wish I could say more about it, and maybe they'll do some sort of Nier spoiler cast with some other folks that have finished it in the future. But it is truly something special, and I really encourage more folks to play. Like the article I wrote last week that kind of discussed some of the sort of existential and like broader and meta questions that asks about robots and humanity and consciousness. Like, it doesn't just like touch on that. Like, it dives about as deep as it can go and goes to some incredibly dark and cynical, but also hopeful places. Like, it really runs the spectrum in a way that I was not expecting for a game that prior to me playing it, I thought was like, oh, it's just a game where you kill some robots. And like, that'll be fine, which would have been fine. Lots of games are fine where all you do are kill robots. And by the end of the game, the robot killing was actually pretty boring by my estimation. Like, I was wildly over-leveled, like nothing could really stop me. But it's a testament to the game that the storytelling was such a hook that even though all I was kind of doing was just bashing on the same buttons and never having to really think about what I was doing anymore, I needed to see what was on the other side. And what's also important about the storytelling in this game is that it is, and especially this moment I'm sort of extremely vaguely describing at the sort of end of my 40-hour journey, can only happen in a video game. Like, Nier specifically takes advantage of the medium in a way that makes the path that goes down very powerful, and it wouldn't work the same if it was a movie or a book or any other way. And I think, not to say that every story told in a video game has to explicitly take advantage of the medium. I think you can tell sort of traditional stories in video games just fine. But there is something special. There's something interesting about when the storytelling can take that into account. And as someone that enjoys video games like you do, like we all do here at Waypoint, when you find something like that where you can point to it and be like, man, like that is something unique to a video game, you don't really come across a lot of games that manage to pull that off. And Nier absolutely did in a way that completely blew me away. Nier was not really on my radar this year, and now it is going to be the game that I will find myself wrestling and thinking about probably for the rest of the year.
Oh, that's wow. That is like the highest best sell.
That is me trying to get people. I know Persona's coming out. I know people are probably still playing Zelda. I know you still need to go back and play Yakuza or Neo, but Nier is not just a good game. I truly think Nier is probably like one of the best. Personally, one of my favorite games I've ever played. If I gut check it, I think it's already in my top 10. I don't know where that sits. Yeah. I am careful to be so hyperbolic, but in the hopes that when I choose to be that hyperbolic, it is in service of a game that I think more people need to play and experience it all the way through to truly understand like the madness that lies within and sort of the unique storytelling that the designer behind this, Yoko Taro, who fortunately, now that I've finished through ending E, I can now confidently send him a bunch of questions. Square Enix has agreed to let us send him a handful of questions for a post-mortem interview, and I wanted to make sure I could sort of fully wrap my head around everything the game is trying to say, so that it can be that kind of interview. But yes, I'm going to continue to demand and pound the desk over Nier in the hopes that people will find the time, because it is really something else.
God, that's really great to hear. I have dipped my toe in. Certainly, I've played a couple of hours of it. I have seen a lot of it because last weekend I had a good friend of the show, Amanda Cosmos, who has written for us before, took me on a tour, evangelizing the game much as you have right here, saying this is really something special. People shouldn't sleep on this. So she had me play sort of the first little section, a little bit, section and change, basically, and then showed me some of the other stuff. In her sort of B playthrough, I think, is where she was at the time. And she is also since sunk like 60 hours in, that kind of thing. Loves it to death. From what I've seen, it seems like something very, very special. My only question, I guess, would be to people who suck at video games, like myself, do you think it's worth, wrestling with a little bit or knocking it down to easy to kind of get through the game? Like sounds like you're saying,
knock it down to easy.
I mean,
and the game has, it builds in additional tools for folks that are there to experience the story. There are explicit, they call them plug-in chips. It's some of the tool sets that you can equip on the player. If you knock it down to easy, there are things that essentially streamline the combat, will take care of it, a lot of it for you, so that, I think the gameplay is fine. I think it wears itself pretty thin. It does. I got to the end wishing, as someone that does enjoy combat like that and being challenged, that there was a little more depth to, a little more Bayonetta in this game.
Sure.
But
yeah.
Given how strongly I respond to the story, I would encourage folks to just put it down on easy, consult walkthroughs, to figure out some of the quirkier ways the side quests kind of unfold, and just focus on trying to get through it and enjoying that part of it, because the actual way the story unfolds, the way it uses multiple viewpoints to unmask things that you think you already understand, and then it is revealed there, you had barely an understanding of what was going on. Like, all that stuff is worth experiencing, and it is not, the gameplay is fine, and it is serviceable, but it is not necessarily why I'd be espousing so much of what I loved about the game. And so I would encourage people to do whatever they need to do in order to continue playing.
Awesome. Well, I need to actually go into it more. I can't tear myself away from Zelda right now, but I'm at the point in Zelda where I've probably put like 80 plus hours in, and I'm probably gonna finish it and then kind of move on to
how many shrines have you done at this point?
60 something.
Okay.
It's not even all of them.
It's
not even all of them. I'm just spending a lot of time in the world, just fucking around, just seeing everything, just kind of doing everything there is to do. And, if I see a shrine, I'll go do it, but I'm not just aiming for the shrines. I'm aiming to see like every inch of this world at this point. Without a horse. I still haven't ridden a horse. So
I rode a horse early on, and then named him Donnell, and then
Perfect.
moved on. Like, I use fast travel just because I like to get to an area and then I'll stop using fast travel, and just kind of explore the depths of that area. But I want to be able to climb. Every time I would get on a horse thinking, well, maybe I should be using horses more, I would just end up getting off and then climbing a mountain and being like, well, that horse, I'm kind of just being a dick. I'm just like bringing this horse out and be like, hey, stay at the bottom of this mountain. I'm gonna
see you later.
I'm gonna laser warp to the other side of the map, and I don't know, find your way back to a stable. So I ditched horses pretty quickly, and have not found them to be a particularly useful part of the adventure. Mostly because I like going into the nooks and crannies, and I took people's advice early on and invested a ton of shrine upgrades into stamina as opposed to hearts. And then just started making a lot of food that gave me temporary hearts to make up for that.
Exactly.
Because so now I have a full 2 circles of stamina, which means like when combined with any sort of stamina boosts that you can get through cooking, I can scale just about everything without having to worry about am I going to run out of stamina? Am I going to fall? And that was fine in the first 20 hours of the game, to have that element of oh God, I got to pick and choose where I'm going to climb. But now I just want to see everything. And so investing in that stamina has really paid off because now I can do that.
Yeah, I'm definitely at the point where I have all the climbing gear, and more than 2 circles of stamina, and all my speed boost stuff. So, like, I'm scaling mountains, like, faster than I can run. It's amazing. It's so much fun. I just, oh, God.
Because you get some of the boost stuff from doing, like, the shrine side quests, right? Like, that's where you get, like, special armor that, like, makes climbing
can get
easier.
special armor. Yeah, there's like climbing equipment, basically. There's climbing boots, and then there's like a climbing shirt, which apparently makes you climb. Link looks really cool in this. It's like a pink and blue little getup. It's actually, he looks like a little MMA fighter or something.
Good.
Like, and it's very cute, you know. So of course I'm wearing that everywhere I go. It's pretty fun. But yeah, Zelda's amazing. I've probably talked about Zelda enough, but I did have a really great experience this weekend. I just want to tell a little story. So my aim in life has always been, I'm a massive Zelda fan. I love the Zelda games. My aim in life, ever since I've been dating my girlfriend, who is sort of the first person who also loves games as much as I do that I've dated, that we would play a Zelda game together. Like, I've always wanted to be like, let's just go through Wind Waker, let's do all the dungeons. And she's always been like, yeah, sure, but it never happened because there was never a new Zelda game when we've been together. And, you know, inevitably, 2 game journalists, we tend to play the things that are new because it's important to be up on things. We finally played a Zelda dungeon together last night, and it was just the best experience in my life. She hated it because she hates puzzles in games. It's funny. We're like opposite people. I love the puzzles. Like, that's why I play Zelda games. I love the puzzles.
And Breath of the Wild has a lot of puzzles.
I know. It's like the game for me. It's very special. So she's like, honey, can you just like do this for me? And I was like, well, why don't we work through it together? Which she was like, oh, fuck, fine. And so we kind of like took our time. Like, we figured out all the puzzles together. And then she beat the boss, which she was very annoyed at, but that was fine. It was just like a really special moment of like, we're sharing a thing that I love, even if you hate it, and it's special to me. You know,
that's cool.
When people are, you know, when you can work together, it's a beautiful thing. Couples that game together.
Yeah, and it's always, you know, I've always talked about, you know, how me and my wife play the Telltale games together. That's like the one way we kind of like funnel, you know, her interests in storytelling with my interests in games. And it is nice when you can find ways to make, given how, you know, so isolated games tend to make you as a player, like in a great way, like feel like it is fun when you get those opportunities to do that with your significant other instead of just sitting side by side doing different things and not, and not collaborating on the same thing.
Yeah, we always kind of joke that, like, our cats must think we're really, like, weird and shitty because we're just always looking at, like, little screens, and they're just like, what the hell? What's wrong with you? Why aren't you feeding me more?
That's fair.
Yeah, the things I think of, you know. But I think that's a good time for us to transition into our sort of second topic today, which probably won't take too long, but this is something you actually brought up today, Patrick, and it has to do with YouTube and advertisers pulling out of YouTube because of a lot of the sort of hate speech that's been spewed around, and it relates to gaming, of course, with the JonTron story, which you wrote about, and sort of the PewDiePie story, which you also took on a little bit. Yeah,
the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and other places have been reporting in the last week or so. It's kind of been an ongoing story. Is that so? Now what's happening is so like the Guardian discovered, a newspaper in the UK discovered that there were advertisements that they were paying for that were being plastered on hate speech. You know, like articles or videos discussing, you know, how all men are rapists and that's okay, and like really disgusting,
bad
like the extreme of the fringes. And the Guardian realized this. And we're like, we're subsidizing the ability for these people to you know, espouse this hate speech. And so they remove, you know, and this happening because the way YouTube ads work is they just kind of get automatically plastered onto videos. There are certain, you know, advertisers can do specific targeted ad buys, but then there's also these services in which the ads just kind of appear on videos that just go up on YouTube. So the Guardian, you know, wrote an article or report, you know, investigating how this happened, how this is unsettling. This prompted sort of a domino effect of other advertisers like Pepsi and Johnson & Johnson pulling out of like the advertising that can be kind of just spammed on sort of any sort of video. They want Google to investigate how to better control how this stuff appears on you know, the really extremist hate speech and other sort of things that they would not want to associate with their brand. So to be clear, like this is, you know, there is no evidence that like this directly affects, you know, people like PewDiePie and JonTron. Like I think the questions people have had about things they've said, things they've done, if you think that's extreme, what's being talked about here is like a far like deeper
on the other level.
Yeah, like it is
sure.
it's not to excuse any of that and the nuance that we could go in there. But we're not saying that like advertisers are pulling out because of JonTron and PewDiePie. They're pulling out because of like really, really fringe rhetoric that is occurring on YouTube. But it does raise this larger question that we've kind of been talking about of like the broader implications of YouTube and like what does it mean for a brand that has their advertising associated with someone, a big YouTube personality, or like the article I wrote about, like what happens when your kid's really into the gaming videos of this one YouTube personality, but then that gaming personality decides to start espousing, white nationalist, like alt-right immigration rhetoric. And like, well, that's not what I signed off on my kid watching. And so I think it's for parents, for brands, like there's a lot of like really tough questions to think about, because I also am sympathetic to Google's argument that, well, we have, I think there was in the New York Times said they're dealing with 400 hours of new video per minute.
Oh, God.
Which is a lot. That's a lot of video.
It's a lot. Damn. Yeah. So how do you, what are your feelings on this? Like, for me, this kind of hits in two places, one of which is that, of course, it's always been a weird thing that sort of something akin to a public forum. It's not obviously a purely public forum, but it is something that we have that's sort of close to that. It's always been weird that this is, of course, run by a company, private company that actually, is after revenue and not sort of the public good. This is not actually public radio or anything of that nature. So it's already a little weird, but I do sympathize with the brands, and I sympathize, of course, with sort of a parent's perspective of wanting to have some kind of control or some kind of idea of actually what's going on here. Not everything is okay to be watched necessarily by your children or by somebody that you're taking care of. Do you have like any specific feelings about this?
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings. Like there was a post going around Twitter this morning, or maybe it was yesterday, in which the question has been like, well, how is any of this speech that's espoused by some of these popular YouTube personalities that are known for, let's say, video games, how does this impact the kids that enjoy these personalities? Like, there was the one that was going around Twitter was a post from NeoGAF in which I think it was an uncle was talking about how their 15-year-old or like something like a young teenage niece who was a big fan of PewDiePie, and then or was JonTron, but like anyways, like they when they read about what they were saying and the implications of that, like it deeply upset them to their core. It was JonTron because what JonTron said was so far in an uncomfortable direction, and the girl was like profoundly upset, and she was like running like a JonTron fan club, at her high school, like, and it like really hurt her to her core about like why is this person would not welcome me or my friends or and so like as a parent, I'm a little ways off from having to do that. My kid is just turned 7 months, so like I'm they're really not even allowed to use phones except when she grabs it and shoves it in her mouth and tries to eat it at the moment.
That's her use right now. Yeah, of course.
But I'm certainly thinking a lot about that and realizing that I can no longer think of it in theoretical terms, like knowing that in the relatively near future it's going to be something I have to think about in practical terms. And I heard from a lot of parents that the thing that actually ends up biting them is like the YouTube suggestion algorithm. So like their kid watches a YouTuber that's been approved by the parent, but then the suggested videos take them down a rabbit hole that is completely different than the stuff that they had kind of approved and looked through. And you just can't. It is not possible for you to completely police, nor should you completely police, like what your kid discovers. And a lot of what I heard from parents was like, do your best to get a general sense of what your kids are seeing, but ultimately what you have to do is try and equip them with the ability to have like a bullshit detector, the ability to sort of like find things, question those things, and raise questions to you about it, like about, hey, Dad, like I saw this and I don't understand it. Yeah, and I think they're like, to get to this this article that we're talking about. I think it's long been ignored, and it's been a long time coming. There was going to be a reckoning with the fact that YouTube is a private platform. People think of YouTube as sort of like a government service, but like it's not. Like it's owned by Google, and like they are going to have every right, if their bottom line is affected, to start pulling advertising or doing, whatever measures they may feel is necessary, if that's impacting their ability to make money on the service that they run. And so I'm sympathetic to folks like JonTron and PewDiePie in the sense that they have built their business on top of this other business, but they built their business on top of another business. And that has consequences. And I think we're only getting to the beginning stages of whether Google and YouTube try to reckon with that in some way.
Yeah, it's really tough. That's a difficult question, and I do always, the ACLU person in me always gets uncomfortable when people, say something is free speech, protected free speech, and then they sort of bring out the whole, this is censorship argument when it's like, it's actually a private platform, which, I get. Certainly, I'm in favor of free speech and so on and so forth, but if the U.S. government did not make YouTube, and that's kind of the thing that we always have to remember, I guess, as people living in America.
Yeah, and
or wherever, honestly.
Yeah. And YouTube is in a complicated position because while that's true, they also need to cultivate that community. They want those personalities to be happy. Like in an ideal world, they weren't dealing with all this hate speech, and it was people just playing video games. But that's, it's 2017. It's not the world we live in, and people are more than ever are, speaking their minds for better or worse. I'm going to be curious to see how they deal with it, because let's take the case of JonTron, where yes, he's going off and espousing, I think decidedly and unequivocally racist views, not only on immigration, but also just straight up about race. But that happened on Twitch, on a conversation with a different personality on a different service. And so how does that impact YouTube? Does that impact YouTube? There's a lot of complicated questions about if someone says something on Twitter, does that impact, what they say on YouTube? Is that grounds for, revoking advertising for them on certain videos or all videos, or the ability to monetize? Those aren't easy questions to answer, and especially because Google prefers to automate everything. This isn't something that you can necessarily, hate speech is subjective and people will make arguments about it. You can't, and also, racist speak is not just people, going as extreme and saying racial slurs. It's coded language that is not going to be picked up by an algorithm.
Absolutely.
It's complicated.
Well, I guess it's very complicated legally and morally speaking, which is always double threat, I guess. But I suppose speaking of speaking your mind, I think it's probably time for us to go to the question bucket.
Okay, let's go.
So, Patrick, give me a number. Let's see. We've got 1 to I'm scrolling and I keep scrolling. Let's say 124.
24. All right. Let's see. I'm looking at my podcast recording. We're 34 minutes in, so I'm going to say 34.
Oh, that's a good number. I like 34. I'm scrolling up and I'm scrolling up, and this is a nice short one, actually. This one comes from Nick.
What's up, Nick?
And Nick asks, Nick with an NIC. I like that. It's a nice, very short shortening of Nick. A lot of games are described as cinematic experiences, and plenty of others are grounded in strong writing. But I'm wondering about less conventional sources of inspiration. Has there been a great game that strongly emulates or is inspired by Chuck Jones, the animator, and Stick the Landing? Nick.
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely, those are certainly there are games that pull aesthetic sources as an inspiration. What's that shooter that's pulling from 30s cartoon animation?
Speaking of Cuphead?
Yeah, Cuphead.
Cuphead? Yeah. That's a good, strong aesthetic. I mean, it's certainly using, gameplay, conventional gameplay, but it has that incredibly strong style and that very I don't have the words to describe this because I'm not an animator, but it has that, I know the very, very simple, the principles of animation about stretching and timing and all that very, very classic stuff that's juicy and it sticks in a really nice way. So I guess that's sticking the landing for sure. Everybody knows this. I love really weird games that have, a very, very non-traditional sort of a point to them. There's a game called Curtain that I absolutely adore, and it is a purposely ugly and garish looking sort of 3D space that you're exploring, and it's about an abusive relationship. And it's basically exploring this person's house, and all the different objects sort of strike up sort of images, and they strike up thoughts that they had and conversations they had with their abusive partner. Things like that. I love stuff like that. I love games that are very, very expressive in ways that are not, the sort of thing where if you ask my parents what video games are, that kind of thing. Well, I guess my parents now know because I talk about this stuff all the time. Somebody like my parents' friends, like they think video games, and they would think there's a very specific image that comes to that. And I love the stuff that's way out on the fringes, that's sort of saying or doing something weird and interesting. I love games that do weird things with architecture. I love all of that stuff. So for me, that's where this comes in. Maybe it's not Chuck Jones, but it's definitely doing something a little weird and different. I'm going to not look.
Okay.
And I'm going to think of a number. Today is the 27th.
It is.
My mom's birthday. So for my mom, we'll go to 27.
That'll be a good question.
I hope it is. If it's bad,
don't screw
I'll
this
be a
up, number
upset.
27.
Oh, this is a very Austin question.
Great.
This is specifically addressed to Austin. I'll ask it anyway. Maybe we can keep it in for Austin.
Okay.
It might be relevant to you. It's relevant to me as well. This comes from Keith L. And it says, Austin, do you miss the freelance life? I imagine it's amazing to work with Vice, something that was addressed in the first episode. How do you feel about where you are now as opposed to where you were a few years ago? Now, at least that part we can both answer, right?
Yeah.
Where you are now.
I think we have both been freelancers over our time in writing about games. I don't miss the time I've done freelancing at all. I found... Oh, hold on. Austin in the chat says...
Austin's here in the chat.
Says, no, I was making $12,000 a year, and I was teaching too. So Austin does not miss the freelance life.
Austin doesn't miss it.
Freelancing is a hustle. It is possible to be a successful freelancer that makes regular money and is able to make that feel as close as you can to sort of like a stable... job that has regular paychecks, but that takes a long time, and it's extremely stressful to get to that place. I found in the couple of times over the years where I had to do freelancing as a result of layoffs or other various things, I was not equipped to deal with freelancing. Personally, it stressed me in really dire ways that I realized. Like, even if there was some magical scenario where you could, like, theoretically make more money doing freelancing, like, I could not handle the stress of doing it. Because what I like about a regular paycheck, other than the fact that it's regular, is like you can have weekends. You can have bad days. It affords failure in a way that you just don't get with freelancing, where it's like, on the weekends, like, I can enjoy my time with my daughter knowing that my check is showing up the next week. If I'm a freelancer, I'm spending those days thinking, I could be making money right now. Like, I'm losing money by choosing to spend time with my daughter. Like, that's not a question I want to be faced with. So, like, over my history, I have stayed with jobs I didn't like. I have taken jobs I didn't want because it was important to me to have a regular paycheck that I knew I could provide for my family, like stability and work. You can budget around a regular paycheck, even if it's less money than as ideal. And it gave me a peace of mind that I knew was important to me because I was not going to be able to deal with. Like, of course, I could deal with it, but it's not something I wanted to deal with, and so I would find ways to not do that.
Yeah.
I don't know what has your experience been like?
Yeah, so I'm in the weird boat where I have never not had full-time work, but I also, especially my sort of first jobs out of grad school, I graduated with a truly massive amount of student debt, and so still to this day, my student loan payments are more than my rent every month, and they were at the time when I was making less than half of what I make now. So I had something like 5 staff writer positions. And I was teaching. I got a little burned out
and you were
doing that, but
living in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, San Francisco and Boston, which is a little less insane than San Francisco, but still somewhat expensive for sure. So yeah, it was something I needed to do. I needed the extra money for sure. The thing I missed least about freelancing is invoicing and sort of keeping track of all of that stuff because I'm fine with deadlines. I was fine with okay, I know what I got to do. I got to do this, and this. But then the sort of the invoice and the tracking the invoice, because inevitably every place is a disaster when it comes to accounts payable and invoicing and actually getting your money and all that kind of stuff. It's the extra bullshit on top of just the work itself that really, really got me. That and paying self-employment tax, which is nasty and gnarly and not something you want to deal with if you don't have to.
No.
Oh, God. I don't miss it at all. I mean, certainly I miss some of the folks I worked with when I was freelancing. I miss, some of the publications, many of which are shuttered at this point. So that tells you a little something else about freelancing and games specifically.
Yeah, it doesn't pay anything. Oh, it pays shit.
Yeah, it's sure not a nice stable gig and not a fun and lucrative.
I mean, to give people
either,
some perspective, it didn't always used to be this way. The consequences of the arrival of the internet, as great as it's been for the proliferation of voices, has had disastrous effects on the ability to pay people to do that work. And it used to be the case that you were, and this was true even in my when I was getting started writing about games for magazines when I was in college. And so then I was 20 years old, so this is 12 years ago, so it's not super long ago, but I'd write for magazines to get paid per word. I don't know.
Nice.
I can't remember what the rate was. It wasn't quite the New York Times, but it was substantial relative to what you would get paid for the same work these days. And it used to be, that you could, if you were writing a 1,200 word feature, you were getting paid per word, which means that was coming out to a pretty hefty sum. Now these days you just get paid a flat rate that sometimes varies based on the word count you've worked out with the person you're writing for. But there's just not nearly as much money in it as there used to be. There's a lot more competition for the spots that there are. And then as a freelancer, there's just so much wasted time. You are sending off pitches, waiting to hear back about that pitch, negotiating for the rate. Then even when you write it, you're trying to get paid, and it may not even be your editor's fault that you haven't gotten paid in a timely fashion. So you're waiting.
It's usually not.
Yeah, you're waiting if you've got a good editor, and we have good editors. But that all of that stuff is wasted time, energy, and stress that takes away from doing freelancing. For most people, is not conducive to doing good work. And it's why. Having more, when we talk about diversity in staffs and stuff like that, there are a lot of diversity of experiences out there that are writing about games, but they tend to be writing about games in a freelance or free capacity in their own blogs. And as someone that has done this for a long time, my best work is done when the stressors around the rest of my life are minimal and you can focus on the work. And so freelancing is not conducive to the best work. Stable, steady paychecks are conducive to the best work. And so there's a lot of voices out there from, different backgrounds that they may be writing, but they're not doing it in the most ideal position because they're having to do it with freelancing, which, as we've outlined, comes with all sorts of stressors in your life.
Yeah, and I think we're both saying this, of course, with respect to the folks that do freelance and who are making it work. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's such a grind.
Yeah, you do what you got to do. But
thanks to all our freelancers. We love them. We love you. You do amazing work. It's just, in a better world, we could just hire everyone and just, have that stability for everyone, I think. At least I would. In my happy, better world, everybody who does good work gets paid a fair amount for it and has a stable paycheck. But, of course, in Austin's absence, I have to do the socialism thing, I guess, make sure.
There you go.
It's not compulsory, but it is what I believe. So, it's fair enough. I think we probably have time for one more question. You want to give me one more number between 1 and 124 there?
We should go higher. Let's do 80. 80.
80. All right.
No, wait, hold on.
Great.
No.
Nope.
We're going to do 66 because that's how old your mom is.
That's
We're
right. So for my mom, hey, I really appreciate this. This is really nice. My mom really appreciates this. Through me, she appreciates
your mom
this.
really appreciates long, exhaustive conversations on the ups and downs of freelancing and video games.
It's what she does. Well, she saw me do it for 8 years, I think, 7 years. So she knows. All right. So this one comes from Bob. Thank you, Bob. While this is not an entirely recent trend, I've found an increasing number of games use enemy health and damage as a way of managing difficulty far beyond what makes sense narratively. Games like Dark Souls have large health pools and flat damage reduction, which leads to very drawn-out fights if you're slightly under-geared. After a new game plus or two, even the most basic underling can have many times the health and damage of the player character. This is most common in Diablo-style loot games. Just about anything with a difficulty slider relies on this measure of difficulty. Adding new AI routines or pathing is more difficult, I understand. But how would you change the difficulty in these types of games otherwise? I think the classic example, and I guess I'll just start with this very classic example, is sort of the way I know that Halo always kind of did difficulties, which really was pretty much entirely AI. Was, the AI just gets smarter. Fights get a little bit more intense because you're actually fighting enemies that are better at being your enemy, basically. So I know it adds a lot more time and cost, and so that's another blue sky kind of thing, but yeah, AI is my answer.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the game, right? So like a game like Dark Souls, I think it works in the way it's set up because it's a stat game, and so like it's important as the player, like if you're equipping gear for statistical reasons that are you're crunching the numbers on, you want to know and have an understanding of the impact of that, and so it makes sense for some games that were like, you don't need to actually, either the damage is reflected in sort of like how the creature or the human or the robot or whatever, like it'll show damage, pieces will fall off. That's fine. But like for Dark Souls or a lot of these loot-based games, like they're numbers. It's like in some ways or in some levels they're numbers games. And so having a representative idea of what those numbers are doing rather than having to just hit them enough times and then just miraculously die, that I think it depends on game to game. Like, and I'm not sure that I would necessarily change Dark Souls' approach to that, because I think it works for what it's trying to accomplish. And then if you were to take away those bars, I think it's different, because like it's when I jump into a fight in Dark Souls and I hit an enemy or hit a boss and realize it's going to be 100 hits before I put them down, like that puts the fear of God in you. Like that's, it's, whereas like in my mind, if I hit that enemy and I took off a third of their health, like there's a far different tension to that battle, right? Like, so like the life bar is actually communicating something about the difficulty and what you're up against, and what you need to pull off. And so the life bar is actually a tool of the designer to convey and sort of enable tension in a way that wouldn't be, I don't think, nearly as possible, even if you were to attack an enemy and a piece of their, if a piece of their leg flies off, like, well, how much damage is that? Like, I'm not sure. And so for, I think some games that's totally fine. But for a game like Dark Souls, like that, especially because it's a game based on sort of intimidation, and giving fear to the player, like realizing that you've got a long ass battle ahead of you, is a way of making that work a little bit better.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what you're saying, and two things coming to my mind through what you were just saying is stakes and mistakes, I guess.
Yeah.
Like a way of raising the stakes in such a way that, it's ratcheting the tension. It is more difficult because the stakes are higher, and also mistakes cost more. It sounds like that's a big part of it. Like, oh yeah, this is going to take 100 hits. I better not mess this up. Like, I'm going to have to get each one of these without actually, getting my face caved in. And that's a much more difficult prospect. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess what you're saying, and also just sort of, anything that raises the stakes and makes mistakes a lot worse is going to make things harder in an interesting way, most likely.
Yeah, and I think sometimes this topic comes up in games that like bring up like sort of like when you have like numbers popping, like let's say playing a first-person shooter where like the number, like the damage count is like popping off for like each bullet, like Borderlands or something like that, where like each shot you're seeing like 306 or something like that, or you can tell if like something's a critical hit or it did poison damage. I understand sometimes people think that stuff goes too far. Like I find that I really like, there's something satisfying about that information dump out of a game. I'm not saying every game needs to have that, but I will admit to being like, there's something real cool about seeing like a real high number come out. Like getting a headshot is one thing, but like having it confirmed that it did like a ridiculous amount of damage because you see like it pop with like 1,000 when you're normally doing like, 300 damage. There's something satisfying about that.
Sometimes those numbers just feel good.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of feel-good numbers, I think that's going to just about do it for us today. What's our number? What are we at for time?
We're 50 minutes in we're 51 minutes in to the 51st podcast of Waypoint Radio.
Perfect. I knew the numbers would feel good. I knew they'd all line up just so beautifully, so wonderfully. So, Patrick, where can people find you online?
They can find me at Patrick Klepek over on the Twitter.
Awesome. You can find me, if you want some good dad jokes, at Danielle RI on Twitter. And thank you, of course, to Tim Barnes. Tim Barnes 451. I always put the O in there. I'm sorry, Tim. He's amazing. He's our producer. Dylan Coburn, who doesn't have a Twitter, but is also an amazing producer. Shout-outs, of course, to Bo N, who lets us use his song Miss You and his EP Pale Machine. You can go to waypoint.zone/BoN. I know this, but I'm looking at my computer so I don't say something completely outlandish and put, extra O's in there, extra zeros. You can find us, of course, on the internet. You can find us on Twitter at Waypoint. You can go to Facebook, Waypoint Vice, YouTube, Waypoint Vice. Find all the amazing stuff we do and not amazing stuff we do. Just all of our stuff at waypoint.vice.com. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'm gonna end not on peace, but on a have a good day.